to talk now to a former detective sergeant from Lancashire Constabulary. His name is Roger Scarborough. Roger, thank you very much for joining me this morning. And I know you've been following this issue in regard to rape gangs, grooming gangs, the debate that's been going on the last few days, but you also have personal experience of attempting, valiantly actually, to do something about this, but there were many obstacles in your way. Perhaps you can just tell us what happened and when you were operating as a detective sergeant. I know you retired in 2005, but just tell us your experience.
Yeah, that's correct. I retired in 2005. We were on a burglary exercise in East Lancashire. East Lancashire, use a term for Nelson, Blackburn, Burnley area. We'd been sent over there from the Fylde Coast, which is the Blackpool area, to try and detect an increase in burglaries. So we were driving around in plain cars. We were unfamiliar with the area. We didn't know any of the local criminals, but that's basically what we were trying to find. Anybody about to commit burglaries. However, as we're driving round, I noticed that one of the taxi offices, where the taxis were parked outside, predominantly Asian drivers, there were a number of young girls. And we're talking now 1990, 91.
Okay. How old were the girls? You're talking about children here.
I'm talking specifically about children, in my estimation. 12 to 15 years, I would put it at. I would describe them as fairly average sort of girls. They did look slightly neglected, I must admit. But what seemed unhealthy was that these young girls were laughing and joking with mature male Asian drivers. And there were several of these girls, and we're talking at a time when grooming gangs were not heard of. Yeah. It was something...
But that's what it was. You were seeing that.
I was seeing that, but I was unaware of it. As I said, I use that term unhealthy because I was very, very unhappy about what I was seeing.
So what did you do about it, Roger? Tell us about what you did about it.
Well, I was liaising with a local officer, and I asked him, I said, what are these young kids doing hanging about with men? And he said, we know all about this. He said, they're out of control. He said, some of them are on drugs, and they've got problems with alcohol. Well, it just didn't sit well with me at all. However, my main concern was these burglaries.
Yeah. That's what you were there to investigate. But you'd raised this with the local officers, and they were saying, well, we know about this, but clearly they weren't doing enough about it.
It's certainly not in my estimation, and I'll put it this way. Knowing what I know now about grooming gangs, if I were to walk down my local main road and see the same set of circumstances, and I'm over 70 now, I would do something about it, and I would certainly be contacting the police. But unfortunately, as I said, to repeat myself, we were talking about a time where perhaps, but it was so abhorrent what has gone on in East Lancashire that you didn't even consider that. And I accepted to a great extent what the local officer said, that they were out of control.
Did you raise it with more senior officers? What did you leave it at that, or did you raise it again?
I did mention it on several occasions. However, I was only there for a couple of weeks. And I was under pressure because we had a team of detectives concentrating on the burglary.
So you could see this. You were essentially a visitor, a visiting police officer to this area, looking at the burglaries, dealing with a specific task. You were raising this. You were talking to senior officers. I mean, what do you think the attitude of the senior officers of the Lancashire Constabulary were at that time, and later as well? I know you retired in 2005. Were they worried about the impact this could have had on race relations? Were they worried about, were those factors clouding out their judgment in terms of actually dealing with crime?
I think 100% you've hit the nail on the head, because everything was to keep race relations on a level playing field. There was nothing done to upset race relations.
And do you think that particular issue was clouding their judgment? They were turning a blind eye to crime. With
hindsight, without doubt.
I mean, that's just appalling, isn't it?
It certainly, and it's worried me ever since, because we're now talking about 30 years plus, and it's concerned me ever since.
Yeah. What do you think should happen now in regard to what the police did or didn't do? Not just Lancashire Constabulary, and we haven't heard from them on this, but Roger, your story is a compelling one. In regard to individual police forces, in regard to what the authorities did, what do you think the way forward is to get back to that time, to think about what happened in the early 90s and beyond, and indeed what is happening right now?
Well, I'd like to think that officers with experiences like mine, and in particular the officers who were local to that area when I visited, for them to come forward and tell the story, because they have far more than I can tell you to say.
Yeah. Roger, it's been fascinating talking about this particular issue. I just wonder about the leadership here as well. What you thought about your leaders in that constabulary when they were essentially saying to you, it's all a bit difficult, pipe down.
I was disgusted. And have been disgusted ever since.
Yeah.
And it's cast a shadow over my service.
Roger, thank you for sharing your story with us. I really appreciate that. That's Roger Scarborough there. He's a former detective sergeant at Lancashire Constabulary. He was a whistleblower, and he wasn't listened to. And that just... Unfortunately, there's so many stories that we won't hear. Thank you for Roger for speaking to us today. I really appreciate that he's done that. But there are just too many times when people did raise the alarm and they were ignored. It is horrendous.